What kind of world are we living in? And what does it take to live well in this world? What do I need to do to be good at life? Now, you may find yourself sometimes asking questions like these, and these are actually the very questions that the books of wisdom literature in the Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, grapple with. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job make up the library of wisdom literature, and each one offers guidance based on generations of past human experience. Now, that's different than the law of Moses, which came down from on high, or the prophets' divine proclamations speaking God's word to the people. Wisdom literature is different. It presents advice based on human observation about the way things seem to be, the cause and effect, the actions and consequences that we all experience while attempting to live the good life. Each of the wisdom books has its own perspective on how to live well. And this sermon series, which we are now in our second week of, will be looking at wisdom, that viewpoint presented to us from Proverbs. Tim Mackey and Whitney Woolard of the Bible Project suggest that it's helpful to think of Proverbs as a brilliant young teacher. She is smart about everything and has incredible insights on a whole array of things: money and work and relationships, sexuality, family, spirituality. She's the perfect friend to have around when you really need specific advice about something that you're working with. And she's helpful because she sees things often that we don't see or we can't see. And she has wonderful insights into life's most troubling situations. And what makes her so smart, Ms. Proverbs? Well, the book posits that there's this invisible creative force in the universe that guides people on how they should live. This force is called Chokhmah. In Hebrew, it's the term for wisdom. Now, Chokhmah is an attribute of God that God used to create the world and everything in it. And it's kind of like gravity. You really can't see Chokhmah, but boy, oh boy, is it working in your life all the time. Whenever people are making good choices, whenever they are making just and wise decisions, they are tapping into Chokhmah. It's that cause and effect pattern that none of us can escape. We learned it probably as children, and it impacts everything we do. Now, as you noted listening to when Beth was reading those Proverbs, there's this contrast set up between the righteous and the wicked, and it's reminding us again and again and again, every choice we make has consequences. This is true of us as individuals. This is true of us as a community, as a society, as a world. Sometimes they're quite lovely, nice consequences, and other times they are not. But I like to think of it as the physics of life. It's just what is. You do this, and this happens. What you sow, you will reap. What we sow, we reap. Now, Chokhmah is not some impersonal force. In fact, according to Proverbs, it's actually an attribute of God. True wisdom makes you journey with becoming wise. It begins and it ends and it's wrapped up with God. And true wisdom would have a healthy respect for this, for what is right and what is not right. Because the wisdom in Proverbs asserts it quite plainly. We live in God's moral universe, and goodness and justice are objective realities that we ignore to our peril. But the good news is that we have help to access this objective reality. And the book of Proverbs personifies wisdom as a woman. She's often called Lady Wisdom, and she roams around the earth, making herself available to anyone who is willing to listen to her and to learn. Any one of us can access and interact with wisdom. Anyone can make wise choices. In order to help us make wise choices, our smart young teacher friend, Ms. Proverb, offered us, in the middle of the book, many of these short, pithy statements. They are ideas that are meant to be easy to remember, even memorized, so that it will increase the likelihood that when you're in the process of making a choice about something, you'll be able to access those proverbs, access their wisdom, and make a good choice. They offer, though, just an invitation. It's not a must or a have to. They offer an invitation and they suggest a probability that these ideas, if you follow them, will help life go well. But it is not a guarantee. And in fact, the book of Proverbs doesn't even deal with what happens if it doesn't go well. That's the wisdom of Ecclesiastes and Job, and that's a sermon for later in the summer. But for today, we're looking at these particular sayings that speak to the character or essential qualities of a wise person. And in each one, we hear a description of a righteous person contrasted with that of a so-called wicked person. And what is the character of the righteous person according to these proverbs? They care for animals and all living things and all of creation. They care for the poor. They stand up against evil. They ground themselves in integrity. They tell the truth. They actively pursue living well. Who among us would argue that these are not fine ideals to which we could all aspire? However, and there's always a caveat, righteousness and justice often appear together in the Hebrew. They're like twin words, and they create this complex idea which we translate into the term social justice. Righteousness and justice can only define your character when you practice these behaviors in real life, in real time, with real people. Because in the mind of an ancient Hebrew, every Hebrew word paints a picture of action, of mitzvah, of good deeds. And you possess chokmah, wisdom, only when you put it to work. So it's like not a nice idea, it's actually applied knowledge or skill. It boldly highlights in the book of Proverbs what the righteous person does. And I think if we ever get off track with this, I think where we get off track is because we look at this call for righteousness and we fall into this trap of thinking that it's our own personal righteousness that we're after, this individual task for us alone. We think it's about personal morality, making sure that we never do anything wrong, so that we personally will not get into trouble, so that we can have our own good life. But remember, these words don't even exist. Their concept can't even be understood in Hebrew unless they are understood in relation to other people. They are relational words, and they do not function outside of the human connection. In order to possess them, they must be worked out in your daily life in interactions with others. It is not enough to just not do wrong. We must actively do what is right and go that extra step to restore what is broken. That's a lot of work. It's about doing right in the wider world. And the character of a wise person is seen in the ways in which they impact the larger, wider world. As Jesus said, you will know them by their fruits. But here's the thing. I know a lot of you, and I don't think that what stops you from ever doing righteous justice, right and just things is somehow a lack of understanding or a lack of will even to do it. Rather, I agree with popular rabbi and author Dana Rutenberg when she suggests that what stops us from practicing justice and righteousness is feeling overwhelmed by how much injustice there is and how big the problems are, the enormity of it all. And then we get stuck in that belief that we alone can't really do anything, and so we do nothing. And though it is true that justice and righteousness are not meant to be the work of only one person, it must begin with one person, with any one of us. So I'd like to conclude this morning by offering you a few examples of these Proverbs lived out. And I think maybe you'll understand how wisdom works. I have a friend who's an occupational therapist. She works actually with children. But after work and in every spare moment of her time, she volunteers at an animal shelter, helping forgotten, mangy pets get adopted into loving homes. And then, in her extra spare time, she advocates for animal rights at her work through her work at a farm sanctuary. And she tirelessly encourages others to do the same. Indeed, the righteous know the needs of their animals. In response to the epidemic of loneliness among our elders, the deacons here at Westside reorganized our at-home communions and created a program that connects those who are more able to get out with those who are more homebound. Relationships are being formed. Isolation is being relieved. Unlike a muddied spring or polluted fountain, the righteous allow life to flow freely through them. And they are like a wellspring of hope and comfort to those who feel stuck and alone. Chris, a local therapist and a good friend of this church, understood the need to go beyond the private counsel that he offers to individuals in the LGBTQ community. He wanted to discover ways to help survivors of discrimination and trauma at a structural level, to root out the sources and causes of the trauma before it happens. So he accepted recently an invitation to appear at a United Nations event on the topic of transgender health in our community and began a conversation to work toward that end. The righteous hate falsehood and seek to walk in integrity. The current immigration crisis at our southern border has left many people feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the desperation of this situation. In response, Rabbi Rutenberg suggests that we make a list of 3 things that you could do or would do to help in whatever way. Pick one thing that you can do this week. Call a representative. Act locally by guiding and aiding people in your own community. Donate your time. And then revisit your list next week. Similarly, one organization with the tagline, "Turn your heartache into action," set a goal this past week to raise $240,000 for emergency response and long-term legal aid and accountability for those children in the midst of this detention crisis. In less than 24 hours, 18,468 individuals donated almost $1.2 million. One day, doing the next right thing, one thing at a time. Indeed, the righteous know the needs of the poor, and they walk in integrity, and happy are the children who follow them. Friends, the hope of Proverbs is that living our lives guided by chokmah, by wisdom, will not merely shape our behaviors, but have a deeper, more lasting impact by shaping our hearts. That our individual movement will tip the scales toward justice for all, choosing life so our descendants may live. And as our closing proverb reminds, whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life and honor. May it be so. Amen.